I find the wine extraordinarily...
I prefer to dine as...
Paul, listen to me.
Leave, I'll just get my things now. Come on, me.
You just have to sign it.
Paul! Are you all right?
Yeah. I'm fine.
The movie begins in the aftermath of World War II as troop transports bring survivors home. Sergeant Paul Sutton steps onto a dock, his heart filled with a simple hope to build a life and a family with his wife, Betty, whom he married just before his deployment. Paul's hopeful smile falters as he searches the crowd for her, a careful, deliberate scan as if she might be hidden in the blur of banners and bouquets, but she isn't. Men on all sides are engulfed by the joyful embraces of family and friends. Paul is left standing in the silent space their welcomes create. The loud reunion of everyone else is a stark contrast to the silence where he stands. Realizing Betty isn't there, he trudges to the apartment they once shared, touching the locket that holds her photograph before opening the door. Inside, Betty is wearing pale green lingerie, seemingly startled by his arrival. She rushes to him, pulling him into an embrace. She says she didn't know he was coming home today, a claim that confuses Paul since he told her about his arrival in the letters he sent almost every day throughout his 4-year deployment. Betty sheepishly reveals that the gruesome battle scenes in his letters were too much for her to read, so she had stopped opening them after the first few. She shows him a trunk full of unopened envelopes as proof she had saved them. Paul is stung by this revelation, as writing to his wife was a lifeline for him on the battlefield, but he swallows his hurt, forgiving her because love is all he wants. Immediately, Betty begins to talk about the economic boom and how she managed to persuade the company Paul used to work for to hire him again. Paul, however, doesn't want to sell chocolates anymore. He tells her that the future he dreamed for them, a home full of children and quiet mornings, was written in the letters she never opened. Meanwhile, Betty speaks only of money and the finer things it buys, insisting he return to his old job because more money means more happiness. Paul relents and agrees to her demands as they share a passionate reunion. By dawn, Paul is back in his uniform, kissing her sleeping forehead before leaving for Sacramento to resume his work as a chocolate salesman. On the train, he notices a poised yet anxious young woman wrestling with an overhead suitcase. It falls, spilling its contents, including a framed picture of her and her father that shatters. Paul, ever the gentleman, springs up to help. As the train sways, he awkwardly falls on top of her before she turns pale and vomits on his uniform. He doesn't mind, as it was an accident, and scrubs the mess in the bathroom without complaint. Back in his seat, Paul falls asleep, only to be haunted by a nightmarish war flashback. He wakes in relief that it was all a dream, but the woman is gone. He hops off in San Francisco to take a bus to Sacramento and, by a stroke of luck, comes across her again. She wonders why he's taking a bus when the train also goes to Sacramento. It turns out their tickets were swapped during their earlier encounter. The woman feels terrible for all the trouble she's caused, but Paul brushes it off, saying it's not her fault. She introduces herself as Victoria Aragon, a graduate student heading home to her family's Napa Valley vineyard. Just then, 2 drunk men come in and begin to harass her. Paul's soldier instincts snap awake, and he wastes no time in confronting and beating them up.
I'm Bill. This is my buddy Herman. And you're,
Not interested.
you know me.
Stop it.
Fellas,
Come on, just give it a shot.
lady doesn't want to be bothered.
This leads to the 3 men getting thrown off the bus. Paul walks along the road towards his destination, but is surprised to find Victoria sitting with her luggage in the middle of the road. Seeing that she's in tears, Paul asks what's wrong. She confesses that she is scared to go home and face her father because she got pregnant by a professor who had left her behind with no accountability. She fears her father will disown her if she comes home without a husband. Paul, wanting to help her and her baby, offers a temporary plan. He will pretend to be her husband for one night so she can enter her home without disgrace. He admits he is married and insists the deception will end the next day. Victoria, desperate and wary, accepts. As they approach the vineyard, the hills sit atop rolling clouds bathed in sunlight. Its beauty takes Paul's breath away, and Victoria tells him her family calls their land Las Nubes, or the clouds. Before they enter, Paul slips a ring from a piece of chocolate onto her finger and then his, in lieu of wedding bands. Suddenly, rifle shots crack the quiet. They seek shelter, but the tension melts when Victoria sees it's her father, Alberto, who is holding the gun. Alberto erupts in furious disbelief when Victoria introduces Paul as her husband. He storms towards the house, calling for his wife. The rest of the household and staff gather due to the racket Alberto is making. Despite his rage, everyone greets Victoria with cheerful hugs upon her return. She then announces the news of her marriage to Paul. Everyone in her family is surprised. Alberto's rage intensifies when he learns Paul sells chocolates for a living, but in the household swirl, the women, Marie and Guadalupe, temper the storm with hospitality. Victoria's grandfather, Don Pedro, embraces the stranger outright, even praising Paul's chocolates.
Huh?
Mas, cierra la puerta. Oh.
It's wonderful.
Paul is invited to join the family dinner, where Alberto interrogates him about his past. When he finds out that Paul is an orphan, he sneers that a man with no past and no future is no fit to marry his daughter with the family's respected Mexican bloodline. Paul holds himself steady, absorbs the humiliation, thanks them for dinner, and slips outside for air. Victoria finds him in the dark and apologizes, but he somewhat understands where Alberto's rage comes from. That night, their charade earns them Victoria's parents' master bedroom, though Paul chooses to sleep on the floor out of respect. In a smaller room, Marie urges Alberto to at least say goodnight to the supposed newlyweds. Unable to cross his wife, Alberto barges into the master bedroom with a stiff goodnight. Paul scrambles to tuck himself into bed next to Victoria, but Alberto's eyes already notice the blanket on the floor. He leaves, saying nothing more. In case anyone else comes in their room, they decide to just sleep in the bed together. Some romantic tension starts to build, but Paul breaks their gaze and goes to bed. Paul has another nightmare that wakes him screaming Victoria's name. When she soothes him, the sound of bells erupts outside. Frost has come down on the vineyard like a white plague. The whole family and workers turn on many fire pipes to pull heat across the vines. Paul asks how he can help, and Alberto barks at him to stand aside. However, Victoria shows him how to use clothes similar to wings to pull and spread the heated air closer towards the grapes. He mimics her rhythm, driven by the desire to be useful, and Alberto watches from a distance. When morning burns through the fog, the vines are saved. Now Paul prepares to depart towards Sacramento. Don Pedro has a different plan and takes Paul walking through the vineyard's history, up to a fenced hill where the first vine was planted by their ancestor in the 16th century. He tells Paul that an orphan is simply a man waiting to discover his family, and that if he wants to, he can consider himself one of the Aragons now. Paul is moved enough to accept the warmth, but still says he cannot stay until the harvest day tomorrow. Don Pedro relents, but reveals to Paul that Alberto predicted his departure, and Victoria will be the one to pay the price. So, to avoid Victoria getting hurt, Paul decides to stay for just one more day. Harvest arrives in Las Nubes like holiday. Victoria's younger brother Pedro returns home from Stanford and greets Paul with open arms. The whole family and workers pour into the vineyard to pick the grapes, laughing and trading songs. Paul watches Alberto's efficient gestures, copies them, and naturally falls into a friendly competition that ends with both men lugging a box each, brimming with grapes at nearly the instant same. The mood expands into celebration. The musicians tune up, and the women step into the great wooden vat to crush grapes with bare feet. Even Victoria gets to join as she's a married woman now, at least to the others. The women pull Paul into the vat, encouraging the couple to dance together amidst the grapes. They drift close in a gravity entirely separate from the lie they're portraying. Later, soaked in juice and music, they finally kiss in private with a hunger that surprises them both, only for Paul to draw back as if burned. He admits that he loves her more than he expected to love anyone, but he is still a married man after all, and he cannot betray both Victoria and his wife. Shocked and saddened, she turns her face away and sobs long into the night, while Paul sleeps alone on the sofa with a headache and the knowledge that the moral path sometimes runs through heartbreak. He is woken up by Pedro and Alberto arguing in the living room. Pedro thinks they should modernize their winery, and Paul suggests bank loans as a safety line during bad years. Alberto snaps, telling Paul to mind his own business. Amid the quarrel, Alberto comments that Paul and Victoria don't seem like an actual married couple, especially now that Paul had slept on the sofa. Paul defends himself by saying that Victoria's well-being is his business because he cares about her. Preparing to leave, Paul notices Victoria clutching her stomach in pain. He rushes to her side and offers to stay for one more night to help her through the stressful quarrels with her father, but she refuses. She says this was not his problem in the first place. She leaves and he pursues her, but instead finds Alfredo in the barrel storage room. Alberto again reminds Paul that he'll never acquire the winery despite marrying Victoria, which Paul responds by questioning whether Alberto even loves his daughter. He insists that he works hard because he loves his children, so Paul tells him to start showing it instead. Victoria overhears the argument and joins in. She doesn't understand why Alberto is so controlling or why he hates Paul so much. Alberto stands his ground, but his daughter is tired of his temper. She asks whether she should leave the family property, but Alberto says he only wants the truth. Paul is about to leave once again. Don Pedro coaxes him into drinking brandy that he made himself. They get drunk together and start to sing a romantic Latin song. Don Pedro teaches Paul the lyrics so he can serenade Victoria from below her window with a mariachi band. Paul sings with a raw, cracked earnestness that draws sleep from every room. Even Alberto begins to wonder if he had been too harsh on Paul, since he now believes the man truly loves Victoria. Don Pedro says that the sign of Victoria's acceptance is if her bedroom lamp turns on, and when the last note trembles away, the window stays dark. Paul walks away in defeat, but then sees the glow after a late pause. Paul, who believes in duty even more than he believes in hope, decides to leave anyway. He ends up in the Harvest Festival the next day, since the bus will be departing from the area. Meanwhile, Victoria and her family arrive for the blessing of the wine conducted by Father Katuri. She sees him and approaches with 2 glasses of wine for a toast. Alberto joins, introducing Paul to the priest as his son-in-law and announces a wedding to take place that evening. Shocked, Paul whispers to Victoria that they cannot continue this unsustainable lie, and she agrees to tell the truth herself. Before she returns to the family, he gives her his Bronze Star medal as a gift for the child she is carrying. She then walks to Alberto and confesses the pregnancy and the fact there is no husband. While the family processes the news, Paul slips out of the celebration. He hitches a ride to Florida, where he once again falls asleep into a nightmare. In it, he and Victoria are holding hands together with a child when an explosion hits, startling him awake, still in the car. He finally arrives at Betty's apartment. When he enters, he is shocked to find Betty is in bed with another man. She tells Paul, not cruelly but coldly, that the life he wants is not the life she will ever want, that she has already filed annulment papers and he should sign them. Paul leaves with papers in hand, dazed at first, but quick returns to him as he can return to Victoria now that he is free from his marriage.
Paul, are you all right?
Yeah. I'm fine.
He immediately hitchhikes back towards Napa, and by the time he reaches Las Nubes, it's already evening. Alberto is deep in drink with his men, brittle with wounded pride. Paul wakes him up and stands openly to ask permission to marry Victoria, pledging also to be a father to the child she carries. Alberto reminds him in anger that he is a married man, and despite Paul showing him the annulment papers, Alberto still demands his gun. Still barehanded, he tries to fight Paul, who dodges his assaults easily. In the scuffle that follows, an oil lamp that Alberto hurls towards Paul misses the target and sets the edges of the vineyard on fire. The fire quickly spreads from just one tree onto the next, and soon enough the whole field is burning. Paul moves quickly, dipping his jacket in water and trying to put out the fire. The whole family and workers soon arrive, including Victoria, who sets aside her surprise to join Paul in stopping the fire. The family and workers run to save what can be saved. Pedro, who also joined the effort, unfortunately caught his clothes on fire and panics. Amidst the screams of horror, Paul soaks his clothes in a barrel and sprints towards the heat where Pedro is, and Paul wraps him in wet cloth and smothers the blaze at his legs. Alberto, who was stunned because of shock and remorse at first, now charges into the rows until Don Pedro drags him back. In the end, the fire was too widespread to stop, engulfing the entirety of Las Nubes. The night burns itself out and dawn shows the cost without mercy. Black stubble where a green river once ran, and smoke sketches over the chapel's hill. The Aragon family and the workers all weep, seeing their home and livelihoods vanish in one night. Don Pedro grieves what he believes is gone, not only the harvest or a season's profits, but the literal root of the family's identity. They all believe that the ancient vine on the hilltop must have turned to cinder with everything else. Seeing the grief-stricken family, Paul decides to do what may be too painful for the others to do. He hikes to the hill with a shovel and stubborn optimism, kneels in ash, and digs with careful hands until he lifts the blackened root of the ancient vine from the ground. It looks dead, with charred skin flaking like old bark, but he brings it down to Alberto anyway. He asks him to cut into it to see if the fire has reached into the core of the plant. The older man stares at Paul for a beat and then frantically draws his knife. He pares away a strip of burnt bark and gasps at a shred of hope. The core had survived the fire, and that small piece of life restores courage to the circle gathered around them. Don Pedro cries out that Las Nubes has not ended after all. With a laughter that is still followed by grateful tears, Alberto turns to say thank you to Paul. Despite his prior rage and mistreatment, he finally accepts that Paul is a good man with a brave heart. As thanks, he cuts a living piece from the root and hands it to Paul to replant, not as hired help, but as family. This symbolizes the trust that Alberto now holds for Paul to help their family restore their heritage, their land, and their livelihood. In the hush that follows the discovery, Paul takes Victoria's hand and slides a real ring onto her finger, and the family, women, men, workers who have earned the right to celebrate, cheers as the couple seal their promise with a kiss. The priest's blessing from the day before echoes in memory. The musicians have nothing left to play, the fields are bare, and yet hope feels less like a mood than like an action. The deliberate work of planting what remains and tending it with patience until new growth rises. The movie ends with Paul, the orphan who returned from war believing he had no one and nothing, except a promise he could not sustain, now getting to live the dreams that he had written in war with a new family in Las Nubes. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe.